It's been exactly 2 years since Russia started a full-scale invasion of Ukraine. And as Ukrainian villages, towns and cities are under constant bombardment, Tucker Carlson, well-known American commentator, decided to visit Russia and interview Vladimir Putin, Russia's dictator. His viral interview with Putin was followed by videos that glorify life in Russia. And today we're going to talk about the meaning and moral significance of this reporting of this interview and of those videos, but also of some reactions to Carlson's trip to Russia. Welcome to New Idea Live, the podcast of the Ayn Rand Institute. My name is Ziemowit Gowin. I'm a junior fellow at ARI, and with me today is Mike Mazza. Hi, Mike.
Hi, Ziemowit. So I
So
think the
let's talk.
first thing, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so let's talk about the interview. What's your take on it? What's your evaluation?
Yeah, so the first thing I wanted to bring up is just how we're going to talk at some length about how Tucker himself sees the interview, but just how the rest of the media is r- taking this, reacting to this. There's a kind of two-sided reaction to this. So I have a tweet from a BBC editor, a Russia editor, um, talking about the Tucker interview, and he says, "For Vladimir Putin, the Tucker Carlson interview was a platform for transmitting the Kremlin's message to the West, and for 2 hours, he was allowed to do that pretty much unchallenged." That's from Steve Rosenberg, the BBC Russia editor. I take that as a critical tweet about the interview. This is a criticism that Putin was just platformed for 2 hours, and that's obviously objectionable. Um, and there's a number of similar reactions amongst mainstream media types and commentators. And Tucker's defenders are kind of saying, like, what's the big deal? Like, it's normal journalistic practice for dictators, terrorists, criminals to be interviewed by the media. Why is this any different? It's not. The United States isn't at war with Putin, so there's not even like a case to like that to be made against interviewing him. It seems like this is just the way we do things. Why does Tucker get any special criticism? And I think there's a perspective where that's a reasonable thing to say if you think that journalists interviewing dictators is acceptable journalism. And Zima, I know you and I don't agree with that, and we'll talk about that in a moment. I said it was a little two-faced that there's this kind of reaction to Tucker because that same BBC reporter before the interview was objecting to Tucker's claims that no one in the media wanted to interview Vladimir Putin. And he says the BBC reached out to the Kremlin several times over the last few years and were rejected. And Christiane Amanpour from CNN tweeted something similar that they had reached out and they were rejected. So there's an element to this that they're just a little jealous. I think that the Kremlin chose to do the interview with Tucker as opposed to something more, as they would see it, respectable, the BBC or CNN. But there's there is a problem with the interview just on its own. It's not particular to the Putin interview. It's just the whole idea that it's morally acceptable or decent to sit down with a dictator, an authoritarian thug, a terrorist, a murderer, and talk to them and hear them out as if they have, there's a two sides to every coin. Let's hear out why this person wants to go and conquer areas of Ukraine and kill a bunch of people and impose authoritarian dictatorship on otherwise relatively more free people. It's platforming Putin is one way to think about it. Giving him some kind of moral legitimacy by treating him this way, drawing an equivalence between each side. Each side needs to have its case made. That's not just something that's going on in this case. That's what would happen when you interview any dictator like that. You give them a platform, you give them an audience, you give them a voice, you give them the legitimacy of a free journalistic inquiry when they don't deserve it. So if the only thing that Tucker did was go give a normal journalistic interview, I don't think there would actually be too much to say about Tucker in particular. We could comment on just this practice of doing this. But what's especially objectionable about the Tucker trip, not just the interview, is one is he does treat Putin with kid gloves. You could imagine maybe the BBC or CNN might have asked more aggressive questions or something, and that would have been slightly better. But what's really objectionable is all of this commentary Tucker does as he's in Moscow, which we're going to play some clips and get into in detail. It's the whole package of this adventure, the interview, and then look at how great things are in Moscow and how cheap the food is, and we'll play all these clips. But before we get to that, I know, Ziemowit, you had a little to say just about the actual content of the interview. So why don't we talk about that before we play the clips?
Yeah, but I wanted to say that I completely agree with you that the problem isn't, as some people say, that Tucker didn't ask tough questions. The problem is that he asked questions that he interviewed Putin in the first place. And as you said, it gives Putin credibility. An independent journalist comes to his palace and gives him platform to speak. And as you said, I think it obliterates the differences between good and evil. Suddenly, a monster. Because let's be clear, Vladimir Putin is a monster, a murderer, is one side of the debate, and so from this perspective, it doesn't matter if you interview a president or a leader of a free country that respects individual rights, respects its citizens, its neighbors, or a dictator who invades other countries. And Putin has already invaded Georgia in 2008 and Ukraine in 2014. And he's a murderer. And one of the so imagine interviewing Hitler in 1939 or 1941 or even before the war. Would that be journalism? That you go to a Hitler to hear about what he has to say about those terrible Jews or Slavic people or other countries that he wants to invade? Because I don't think that there's any difference in interviewing Putin versus interviewing Hitler. Now, about the interview itself, I want to stress that I think that what's actually more interesting is Tucker's justification of the interview and then what he says about life in Moscow and Russia. But the interview itself is really, so I watched the whole interview, obviously, and the interview is really the same Russian propaganda with a longer historical lecture about how Russia was established and how Ukrainian land always belonged to some entity called Russia. And so, first of all, there was nothing new. We've already known this propaganda for years. Now, one thing that I want to say is that Putin's justification of the invasion is simply philosophically wrong. Because even if it's historically true that Ukrainian lands always belonged to some form of the Russian state, which, by the way, I don't think is true, but that's not for us to, that's more for historians to debate. But even if that were true, it doesn't give him any right, any right to invade a country. Why? Well, because what matters is not whose lands belong to whom and when, it's what the kind of government you have. And the Russian government is a dictatorship, and as such should be an outlaw. Doesn't have any rights because it violates the rights of its citizens and the rights of other people. And there are many countries. Like I live in Poland, and Poland right now has some land that used to be the German land or the Prussian land, uh, and Ukraine has some land that used to be the Polish land, etc., etc. And if you take a look at the long and bloody history of Europe of constant wars, you will see that that such disputes would be endless. Who owned what and when? But the problem is, again, that it's not about the land or history. It's about a moral evaluation and moral right of one country that is a semi-free country that basically respects its citizens' rights, versus a dictatorship that wants to conquer other nations, nations that are basically free. And of course, one of the things that Putin said, but it's again, he's been repeating that for years now, that it's because of NATO's expansion, it's Ukraine's fault, that it's about the Nazification, although it doesn't make sense. It's not justified at all. Um, so the interview, for those of you who have not watched the interview, I would say if you know the whole narrative of the Putin's regime, you know it all. There's nothing new except for a very long historical lecture about history of Russia and some other countries like Poland and Ukraine. Um, so let's go to Tucker's justification of the interview. So he explained why he's doing that, and we have let's play our first clip.
Here's why we're doing it. First, because it's our job. We're in journalism. Our duty is to inform people. 2 years into a war that's reshaping the entire world, most Americans are not informed. They have no real idea what's happening in this region, here in Russia or 600 miles away in Ukraine.
So what Tucker here is saying is that basically for Americans to be informed, he needs to go to a liar and murderer, a person who has literally blood on his hands, in order to be informed about the war. He's also suggesting that Americans can't get any truth from their media, from the Western media, which I think is despicable, given the fact that there are Western journalists from Europe, from the US, on the front lines in Ukraine. Mike?
Yeah, I don't really see where he's coming from saying that the source of our being uninformed is that we have a lack of perspective from Vladimir Putin. That's a little crazy. But this what he's giving is a kind of standard justification for these kind of interviews. So you would get this. There was a documentary on Showtime in 2017 where Oliver Stone interviewed Vladimir Putin for, I think it was a couple hours. The same kind of justification, not in the context of a war this time, but just, yeah, you need to understand what's going on in Russia, and the way to do this is to interview this person and give them a show on Showtime. And that's completely dubious that you'd need to do that to learn about the motivations of a hostile regime. You need to platform them like this. And Ziemowit, as you were saying, like, there's nothing new in the interview. So what exactly did, even if that was if there were some plausibility to that justification that, oh, we need to interview these people to learn how they tick and blah, blah, blah. Well, I mean, if he just gives the same propaganda that he gives it, in public, heard all that before in some form by consuming Western media. So it's nothing I learned. So there's a kind of, some of what he's saying too is a little bit of braggadocio, like he's getting this interview and nobody else wanted to interview him. And as I said before, that's not true. It's just that Tucker was chosen above others. Others reached out also. And I think the second clip we have, I think, has some more interesting substance to it. So let's head over to that one.
And yet the populations of the English-speaking countries seem mostly unaware. They think that nothing has really changed. And they think that because no one has told them the truth. Their media outlets are corrupt. They lie to their readers and viewers. And they do that mostly by omission. For example, since the day the war in Ukraine began, American media outlets have spoken to scores of people from Ukraine, and they have done scores of interviews with Ukrainian President Zelensky. We ourselves have put in a request for an interview with Zelensky, and we hope he accepts. But the interviews he's already done in the United States are not traditional interviews. They are fawning pep sessions specifically designed to amplify Zelensky's demand that the U.S. enter more deeply into a war in Eastern Europe and pay for it. That is not journalism. It is government propaganda. Propaganda of the ugliest kind, the kind that kills people.
It's really unbelievable how Tucker is suggesting that, or is saying almost explicitly, or is implying that Russia and Russia's dictator, who treats his citizens as cannon fodder, who kills people, that he's more trustworthy than Western media. This is something that is really difficult to evaluate, because it's a complete nonsense. It doesn't make sense from any perspective. And again, I want to say that Tucker ignores the context, or either he doesn't know about it, which I doubt that he doesn't know, or he's intentionally ignoring the context, which is Putin has given a lot of speeches about why he's invading Ukraine. And all of those speeches have been reported by Western media in the US, in Europe, in Poland, in the UK, everywhere. Moreover, it's not only about some speeches that we all can access anytime. Even we can go to the Kremlin's website, where we have transcripts from those speeches. Putin has published one essay, or even more, about his perspective on Ukraine. So it's really not true. It's literally not true that you would need to go this and that amount of miles to get what Putin is saying. We know what he's saying, and we've known that again for years. And by our, I mean the Western journalists have been reporting that for years. So again, there's nothing new, and there's absolutely no reason for anyone to go to Putin, because he makes those speeches and he publishes those essays that show his perspective. What do you think, Mike?
Well, so I want to focus on what he's saying about the media lying by omission. So my take on the whole Tucker trip is that one of the things he's doing here is using Russia as a way to take America down a peg. So the American media, the Western media, is lying. There's very real problems with the Western media, but on this issue, I don't see what is being omitted. Like you said, Ziemowit, like Western media discusses these Putin speeches and essays, and we're very informed about that. he complains about them giving a false view of the war and fawning over Zelensky. Well, Zelensky's been much more willing to talk to the press than the Kremlin has. So that's part of the explanation. As I mentioned earlier, several major news outlets said that they had tried to interview Putin and they could not. But I want to come back later to this claim that there's a lies by omission being spread, and that the effect of this is some kind of government propaganda. I think that's not true of the Western media, and I think it is true of what Tucker's doing. I think there's a lot of lies by omission in Tucker's commentary on his time in Russia. And we have another clip here, I think, ready to go, in which he talks about life in Russia. He's at the grocery store. I think that's the next clip. Yeah.
I went from amused to legitimately angry. So we were guessing what this would cost. Everybody hears from the United States buys groceries, and we didn't pay any attention to costs as we were just putting in the cart what we would actually eat over a week. And we all came in around $400, about $400. It was $104 US here. And that's when you start to realize that ideology maybe doesn't matter as much as you thought, corruption. If you take people's standard of living and you tank it through filth and crime and inflation, and they literally can't buy the groceries they want, at that point, maybe it matters less what you say or whether you're a good person or a bad person. You're wrecking people's lives in their country, and that's what our leaders have done to us. And coming to a Russian grocery store, the heart of evil, and seeing what things cost and how people live, it will radicalize you against our leaders. That's how I feel anyway, radicalized. We're not making any of this up, by the way.
So he's accusing the American media of lying by omission. What is this other than a lie by omission? Tucker's middle-aged adult American man who travels the world. He knows that the prices of things vary by location. He's aware that there's a concept, cost of living. What percentage of the average Russian's income goes to food versus the average American's income goes to food? I mean, this is, I'm not breaking any ground here. This has been talked about over and over, that, yeah, it's Russians spend $100 American on groceries. That's like they're spending about a third of their income on food. Americans spend 10 to 15% of their income. It doesn't translate, and Tucker's completely capable of knowing that, probably does know it. That's why I'm characterizing this as a lie by omission. So the fact that groceries are cheaper in Russia doesn't tell you anything about life in Russia. You travel the world and you'll find groceries are cheaper in all kinds of places, and the standards of living are lower in those places too, and the incomes of the people in those places. All of those numbers you have to take not as absolutes but as relative, like how many dollars is this versus how many dollars you earn. And he's going there saying these kind of things that's propping up the Russian state, trying to tear down the United States, and misleading his audience about something important. What is life like under an authoritarian dictatorship? So he's lying by omission in a way that can get people killed, or does get people killed. So this whole trip he's doing, the best light I could paint on it is that he's using it to take shots at his political opponents. But I think I think that's too generous. I think he is angry at the state of America, and he's using it to take the United States down a peg or two by whitewashing Russia.
Yeah, and so as you said, he completely ignores facts about Russia. He visits the most rich city. Well, generally in Russia, if anyone knows anything about Russia, is that only a few cities are relatively rich, and the standard of living is not that terrible. But in all other parts of Russia, people are really poor. So you said that uh, he didn't say what percentage of income the Russians spend on their grocery. It's 40%.
Oh,
40% versus 9% in the US and 13% in Europe. Um, but of course, for anyone who thinks about it for, I don't know, half a minute, it will be obvious that it doesn't make that this comparison between Russia and the US doesn't make sense. Obviously, if you go with the second largest, the second most powerful currency in the world to a poor country, obviously you will be able to buy more stuff. Um, but for those who are interested in the differences between U.S. and Russia economy, you could check out uh, GDP per capita, which is $15 for Russia and $78 in the U.S. And of course, I'm not going even to mention the life expectancy in Russia or alcoholism in Russia, because its age is just terrible. And yeah, I think that you're completely correct that he's lying by omission. He's doing what he accuses others of doing. So maybe let us now move to clip number 4, which is also interesting.
Every leader kills people, including my leader. Every leader kills people. Some kill more than others. Leadership requires killing people. Sorry. That's why I wouldn't want to be a leader. That press restriction is universal in the United States. I know because I've lived it. Ask my former, I've had a lot of jobs. And I've done this for 34 years, and I know how it works. And there's more censorship in Russia than there is in the United States, but there's a great deal in the United States. And so, at a certain point, it's like people can decide whether they think, what countries they think are better, what systems they think
Sir,
are better. I just want to know what he thinks. That was.
now he's drawing he's explicit in equivocating between the U.S. and authoritarian Russia. With, like, he says, leaders kill. Who do they kill? Putin kills journalists and imprisons the opposition leaders. That does not happen in the United States. When was the last time the United States government is even suspected of assassinating a journalist? Or a United States president imprisoned an opposition party member? That doesn't happen in the United States. He says there's press restrictions in the United States. I mean, I don't know particularly what he has in mind. There are some worrying things that have happened over the last few years with respect to the Biden administration and social media. But that is not at the same level of what's going on in Russia, where, again, journalists being killed by the secret police, those are not the same thing. And here he's drawing an equivalence between it. And it's reminiscent of the interview Donald Trump gave years ago, in which he says something almost identical, that Putin kills people. Oh, we're so great. We have clean hands. It's very troubling that this is the direction so-called thought leaders on the right are going. It's an apologia for a murder and dictatorship.
This is so evil. This is so evil. If you watch other videos with Tucker, he repeats all the time that he's an American patriot. I'm an American, so I want the US to flourish, etc. But he is comparing the US, a country that is founded on the principles of individual rights, of people's rights to liberty, to property, to the pursuit of happiness, to life, with a dictatorship. It's a pure amoralism and cynicism. He says that every leader kills. So what's the implication of that? The implication is that it doesn't matter if you're a constitutional republic, the Bill of Rights, the Declaration of Independence, which is the greatest political document in the history, it doesn't matter, because every leader kills. And yeah, there's censorship in the US. What's the evidence of that? Well, none, because in the US you actually can say, well, whatever you want. You can criticize our presidents, you can criticize Biden or whatever the Biden's administration is doing, and that's good that you can do it. You will not go to jail, you will not be silenced, you will not be murdered by secret police or some other thugs. And in Russia, so he says that in Russia there's more censorship. In Russia, people are literally killed, silenced. If you speak about the war, about this war in Ukraine, which, by the way, from the Russian perspective, the Russian propaganda, I think, still calls it a special operation. If you speak about this war in a way that Putin's regime doesn't like, doesn't approve of, then you can go to jail to up even 15 years. And Tucker dares to compare that country, a dictatorship, to the US. This is, from my perspective, this is pure evil. And by the way, a several days after the interview was published, Alexei Navalny, who was one of the leaders, if not the leader of the Russian opposition, was most likely murdered in his prison. And we have now mass arrests in all over Russia. So there are people who protest after this death of Alexei Navalny, and they are being put to prison. And imagine something like that happening in the US. You would never see it. You would never see it. So now I think we can move to our last clip, which is clip number 5.
And the most radicalizing thing I would just say for me in the 8 days I spent in Moscow was not simply the leader of the country, who of course is impressive. It's the largest landmass in the world. And it's wildly diverse, linguistically, culturally, religiously. It's hard to run a country like that for 24 years, whether you like it or not. So an incapable person couldn't do that. He is very capable, and many of you know him and you know that. What was radicalizing, very shocking and very disturbing for me was the city of Moscow, where I'd never been, the biggest city in Europe, 13 million people. And it is so much nicer than any city in my country. I had no idea. My father spent a lot of time there in the 80s when he worked for the US government and barely had electricity. And now it is so much cleaner and safer and prettier aesthetically. Its architecture, its food, its service, than any city in the United States that you have to, and this is non-ideological. How did that happen? How did that happen? And at a certain point, I don't think the average person cares as much about abstractions as about the concrete reality of his life. And if you can't use your subway, for example, as many people are afraid to in New York City because it's too dangerous, you have to sort of wonder, like, isn't that the ultimate measure of leadership?
Here he's not just singing the praises of Russia. This is actually an apology for authoritarianism. What this reminded me of when I first heard it was Italians used to say back in the 1920s as an kind of rationalize Mussolini. At least he made the trains run on time. Well, at least the subway is pretty. I mean, in America, we have ugly subways with graffitis and bums, but over here, we have nice subways. I guess that makes it worth it. That makes a dictatorship justified. It's crazy, wicked. And what's most interesting to me about all of this is just there's this shift going on, and Tucker is a kind of shining example of this. Maybe younger viewers don't realize this, but when Tucker first became a public figure is 20, 25 years ago. He was a CNN. He was on a kind of debate show where there were a conservative and a liberal would debate. And he was a kind of libertarianish, free market conservative, singing, kind of a Reagan type conservative. And now he's on stage making excuses for dictatorships. And like we already said, the things he's praising Russia for aren't even like, maybe the trains did run on time in fascist Italy. The grocery stores aren't better in Russia. It's not even true what he's saying. And one of the things he said on stage that jumped out to me is at the end, he said, people aren't concerned with abstractions. At some point, they're just concerned with the concrete reality. Are the subways any good? It's interesting and revealing. I mean, what happens if you don't take ideas seriously, and you are a kind of conservative who wants to defend America? Well, what you don't realize is that what's good about America are, the so-called abstractions, that we have individual rights, including free speech, including open and fair elections, including the right to oppose the government without being murdered. So those sort of rights, those sort of abstractions that Tucker, we don't care about them. At some point, you have to care about the concrete reality of life. And he doesn't even have a good read on what that is in the United States versus Russia, as we said before. I think a final, just interesting observation. 8 years ago, our senior fellow Ankar Gate wrote an article on the election of Donald Trump called "One Small Step for Dictatorship," and one of the points Ankar was making is that the rise of Trump and the Trump phenomenon marks a shift towards the acceptance of authoritarianism, of demagoguery, strongman types amongst a segment of the American population. And at the time, a lot of the people like Tucker who were sympathetic to Trump or defending Trump or in favor of Trump were sort of in denial that there was this authoritarian streak in the Trump right. Now there's no longer denial. It's out in the open. It's saying it out loud. And here he is on stage, a major conservative influencer figure, giving the same sort of rationalizations for Vladimir Putin that fascist sympathizers gave for Mussolini in the 1920s, 100 years ago. And on that point, I think we have a couple of other conservative influencers sort of me tooing or echoing Tucker. So we have, is that up?
Yeah, it's up.
Ziemowit,
So
we have did you want to say something about that?
yeah, so but I wanted to say again what you already said, but I think it's worth emphasizing that one of the reasons why we wanted to talk about this topic is not only to comment on interviewing dictators as such, which we think is wrong. We also wanted to talk about this whole trip, the way that Tucker Carlson justified this interview, which we think, as we've said, it doesn't make sense. It's not based on facts, etc. But it wouldn't be such a problem if not for the fact that that he has so many supporters. And when I went through a lot of comments, posted by normal Americans, conservative types, they would say something like, "You're brave," and sometimes they would say that, well, Putin is a great leader. They would say that. What we see here is interesting. So one of the things that we didn't comment on that happened in the interview was Putin's completely absurd conspiracy theorist-like claims that the US is basically run by the CIA. So CIA runs the United States. This is what Putin said, basically. And here we see Candace Owens from the Daily Wire. She's an extremely popular figure, a commentator. She has, I think, over almost, I think, 5 million followers on Twitter. And her videos on YouTube are viewed by probably millions. And this is what she says. Quote, our presidents are puppets. We already knew that, but Putin is confirming it, close quote. So now our source of what's true, what's happening anywhere in the world, but especially in our country, in the United States, is some dictator, a murderer, a monster, a liar. And the other example is Jackson Hinkle, who's also a conservative. He believes in conspiracy theories, and he's basically pro Putin. He thinks that Putin's war in Ukraine is justified, and he also praises Tucker Carlson's interview. Now, our last example, but of course there are many, many more, is Charlie Kirk, who maybe isn't saying that Putin is great, but that this interview is a masterclass. Well done, Tucker. And one of the things that I think is interesting, because we chose those three persons here as an example, because they're all very young. I think that Jackson Hinkle is like 24 years old. Candace Owens is 30 something. Kirk is, I think, 28. I might be wrong, but it's I think not more than 30 years old. So they're all very young, and we can see how Tucker's whitewashing of authoritarianism is being accepted and spread and justified by the new generation of people who are already very, very influential. So I think personally that it is very, very disturbing. And what's your take on that, Mike?
Yeah, I agree, Ziemowit. And I mentioned before just about Tucker personally starting off as a kind of Ronald Reagan type conservative, and now he's, it was Reagan who called the Soviet Union an evil empire, and now we have Tucker later in life talking about how competent a former CIA, or excuse me, a former KGB agent dictator is of the modern Russian Empire. So it's a depressing and disturbing shift, which is not just isolated to Tucker Carlson, but you can see writ large on the right. There was always an element or a dominant sense of skepticism of abstractions of philosophical systems on the right that you kind of get from Tucker's comment about, well, at some point, who cares about abstractions? And one of the exceptions to that is, well, there's at the same time that there was this kind of skepticism of abstractions of deep philosophy, there was also a tolerance or an endorsement amongst a lot of people on the right of religion. And I think if you read about Charlie Kirk, Candace Owen, and Jackson Hinkle, they're Christian. They think of that as their, that's their identity. I'm not sure how religious Tucker is, but if you track the trajectory of the right and use Tucker as a indicator of this, they start out with Milton Friedman, Hayek, maybe even some Ayn Rand, giving them free market ideas. They're uninterested in the deeper philosophical questions, except in the form of religion. And then over time, what's happened is the bad has driven out the good or the better. And you see a more and more serious, taking some of the authoritarian aspects of religion, is more seriously animating how they're thinking about the world. So now you have the right opposed to the left on the grounds of their own version of authoritarianism. Did we want to? I think we have a few questions we wanted to look at.
So
close.
first of all, I wanted to thank everyone for the super chat, for your support. So we have there's one question. Someone asks, why not listen to what a liar has to say? Otherwise, how do you know they are lying? Mike, what's your take on that?
Well, it's not like we haven't heard what Putin has to say. Like
exactly.
some of the commenters are saying, he's got a big audience. I mean, he's the leader of one of the largest countries in the world. He's got a big audience and a loud voice. It's not a secret what he has to say. So what's the point of having him say it again?
Yeah.
Especially if all you accomplish is legitimizing him, giving him a chance to just elaborate, look like a serious, thoughtful historian of the region. Like that's something that Tucker's given him that he wouldn't have just speaking from the Kremlin.
One other question is, if Putin wanted to get his message out, all he has to do is make a TikTok video. Why are we pretending that refusing to interview Putin would be meaningful? And the reason is, I think we covered that during the first part of our episode. The problem is that if you interview Putin, you pretend as he is one of the sides in the debate. You are legitimizing him. You are telling other people, yeah, he's a reasonable guy. I can ask him questions. And you're pretending that he's not a murderer, that he's not a liar, but we know he is. And one other thing that we didn't say is that also helps Putin's propaganda. It helps his propaganda abroad. So more Russian trolls on Twitter and in other places will say, here, take a look. An American journalist is able to ask great questions. But also, such an interview can be used as a propaganda, and actually has been used as a propaganda inside Russia. Mostly Putin flexing his biceps and saying how tough he is and how Tucker soft is.
Just one more point on this. There's a slight sense in which the questioner has a point. So if just Tucker didn't interview Putin and then somebody else did, like, yeah, okay, what difference does it make if Tucker's doing this? But to think about the effect is, our position isn't Tucker shouldn't have interviewed this particular dictator. It's that journalists in general shouldn't be interviewing dictators. So imagine a world in which no American journalist will have anything to do with foreign dictators other than maybe calling them the horrible, evil bastards that they are. Like, what effect would that have if the respectable, civilized part of the world boycotted and refused to sanction the evil part? And that would make a difference. Yeah, so you're right that just Tucker doing this or not doing this is a marginal difference, but that's not the point. The point is that nobody should be doing this. No journalist should be doing this. No one who cares about individual rights and freedom should be giving any kind of sanction to a person like Vladimir Putin.
We just got a YouTube.
Do we get another question?
Yeah, we do. No, but I just wanted to acknowledge a YouTube super chat from KFAX. $20. KFAX says, keep it up. Thank you for your support.
Okay, so then I think that's all we have to say on this topic for today. Some resources, if you want to follow up on some of the things we said, I think we recommended Onkar Ghatel's essay from 2016, One Small Step Towards Dictatorship. Ben Bayer and Elon Journo have an essay on the war in Ukraine itself. Putin's war embodies national conservatism's ideology from 2022, so about 2 years old, still relevant. If you've enjoyed our commentary, please be sure to like and subscribe to our YouTube channel. We'll be back next week with a topic to be determined. So if you hit the bell notification, also you'll learn when we go live. Please send us your questions for future Q&A episodes to experts@aynrand.org. We'll be launching a standalone Q&A podcast imminently. So if you'd like your question answered, again, send it to experts@aynrand.org. If you're watching the recording, also please like, comment, share, subscribe, etc. This helps us attract new viewers, helps us get promoted by the various social media algorithms. Do the same if you're watching on Facebook, of course. If you have comments or questions about today's episode, or you have suggestions for future episodes, please send us an email at newideal@aynrand.org. We read all of your emails, we reply to many, and we do take suggestions for subsequent podcasts as well. Thank you. Thanks, Ziemowit, for organizing this, and we'll see you all in a future episode.